day, great world learners. Welcome to today's business studies lesson. My name is Tiriso Tlhaka, and this lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Today we look into paper 1 revision lesson for business studies final exam. Now, learning outcomes. By the end of this unit, you should be able to know the following. 1. The structure of the paper. Number 2, the main topics that are going to be assessed in your paper 1, and you should be able to do a proper interpretation of section B and section C questions to say how do you go about answering and approaching the exam. Now, let's start with the first part of our lesson, because with our revision, we are trying to cover a lot of ground. And the focus is your business environment as a main topic. Now, when we look into the structure of the paper has 3 sections, section A, B, and C. Let's start with section A. Section A consists of compulsory short questions, which are allocated 30 marks, and the time that should be spent answering the section should be 20 minutes. Section A will assess both main topics, which is the business environment and the business operations. And you have your multiple choice in your 1.1. You have your 1.2 being choosing the correct weight from the box with the different concepts. And then you'll also have 1.3, which we call the matching items, wherein you are going to be comparing between column A and column B. Now, that is your section A. And these will be assessed as compulsory questions, meaning everyone should answer the section A, which is question 1. Now we go to section B. Section B has 3 questions. Section B has 3 questions. So those 3 questions, there will be an instruction that says to choose any 2 questions. How much is the mark allocated there? The mark allocated is 80. Why? Because as you choose 2, each question is allocated 40 marks. So when we say 40 times 2, the total mark is 8. Question 2 will assess business environment subtopics, whereas question 3 will assess business operations subtopics, and they will be allocated 40 marks, 40 marks. And then you also have question 4, which assesses what? Both the business environments and the business operations, and wherein they are allocated 20 marks to make question 4 to have 40 marks. So it is very, very important that now when you look into the breakdown of section B, where we say question 3, question 2, and question 4 will be having such main topics, be aware that with question 4, both main topics are being assessed. You'll have questions from the subtopics under the business environment and questions from the subtopics under the business operations. And then when you are choosing question 2 and question 4, you should be aware that with question 2, yes, you'll be answering business environment, but with question 4, you are still answering business environment, which will be assessed for 20 marks, but you'll still answer question business operations, which is allocated 20 marks as well. So this makes it necessary or makes it important to prepare both the business environment subtopics and the business operations subtopics. And the time that is allocated there is 70 minutes. Now we proceed and we look into section C. Section C will assess your essay type question. With your essay type question, the instruction is choose 1 question, because in section C you have 2 questions, which is question 5 together with question 6. Now let us look into the mark allocated. The mark allocated is 40, and the time you should spend writing your essay should be 30 minutes. Now question 5 will have an essay from the main topics business environment, and then question 6 will have an essay from the main topics that assess business operations. Now let's talk about these 2 main topics that are covered in paper 1. You have business environment together with business operations. The focus of our lesson today is on the main topic, business environment, wherein we talk about the impact of recent legislation. We also talk about business strategies together with the business sectors and their environment. Now, let's look into the subtopics that are assessed again on your business environment. The impact of recent legislation on businesses. This is what we normally call acts. Remember that you have 8 acts in total, and 6 of the acts we call them labor laws, and 2 of these acts we call them consumer laws, because they protect consumers as they're in the process of conducting a transaction with the business, and also as some consumers might be buying or conducting a transaction or buying goods with credit. So there is a law that protects consumers when buying goods on credit, and there is a law that protects consumers whether they are buying goods on credit or not, which is your Consumer Protection Act and the National Credit Act. Then we have business strategies, which was taught in term 1, which is also part of the main topics that we say they assess the business environment. And then the other one is business sectors and their environment, which was taught to you during term 2. Now, business environment typical essays. For question 5, the question might be on impact of recent legislation, meaning one of the essays might come from an essay question on the impact of recent legislation, meaning out of the 8 legislations, one of the legislations might be an essay. And then another one is business strategies, and it can also be assessed as an essay under question 5. But when you look into business sectors and their environment, they cannot be assessed as an essay because they have little content which would not test the real art of writing an essay. Then, let us look into typical exam questions. This is how a business studies essay is going to be structured. You will have the preamble, which is the information you see in the table here. So when you have that information, do not use this information to use for your introduction or to use as your conclusion, because immediately you do that, you render yourself of being marked with an R to say repetition, because you have repeated information that is already on the question paper. So I would advise that do not quote any information from this box. Now, let us look into what the preamble is saying here. The basic aim of Employment Equity Act, which is Act number 55 of 1998, is to promote equity in the workplace. It allows for improved and greater transformation processes in the workplace, and the businesses are expected to comply with this act and fully be conversant with its requirements. Now, you are an expert in what? In the consumer or labor law. Write an essay on the following aspects. In your essay, you'll have introduction, then you'll have subheading number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Then you will have your conclusion. Now, you are expected to write an essay on the following aspects. Where number 1, you outline the purpose of Employment Equity Act. Number 2, you explain the impact of this act on the business, which is the Employment Equity Act. Then you discuss penalties for non-compliance with the Employment Equity Act. Thereafter, you advise on ways in which they can apply or comply with this act. So those are the essay that you would be expected to complete under Employment Equity Act, just to practice so that you become familiar with how they can assess an essay. Then another one might be on Consumer Protection Act, where we are saying you are an expert in consumer law. Write an essay on the following. Discuss 4 consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection Act. Explain the purpose of the National Credit Act. Explain the impact of the National Credit Act, and recommend ways in which the business can comply with the National Credit Act. So That is another typical essay. And then we also have another typical essay, which might be now on business strategies. And we look into the preamble again and say, okay, with the preamble here, do not quote, do not take information from the preamble and want or attempt to use it as your what now, as your introduction or conclusion, because it will be given an R. Why? Because it is a repetition of the information that is already appearing on the question paper. So the instruction is to write an essay on business strategies in which you include the following. You describe the management process, thereafter discuss the 3 types of intensive strategies that the business may use to address challenges in the macro environment, because business strategy is there to make sure that the business will survive in the macro market environment, because the micro and macro the market and the macro environment, those are the environments that determine the success of the business. Then you have to explain the types of intensive strategies and also explain how the business could apply the 5 Porter's forces model to analyze the market environment. Then you advise businesses on the effectiveness of the diversification strategy for 30 marks. Then that's how you should go about looking into the business environment essays. It can be on any legislation. It can also be on the business strategy. Now, let us look into typical question 2. Now, with question 2, I will start by looking into the work that you should know how to identify from the scenario. So now, let us look into legislation. All legislations, you should be able to identify them from the scenario. You have your Skills Development Act, you have your Labor Relations Act, you have your Employment Equity Act together with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Then you have the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act together with Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Disease Act. Thereafter, you have National Credit Act, and then you have your Consumer Protection Act. So all those are considered to be legislations, and there might be an exam that requires of you to identify them from the scenario. What is key is to know ways to comply with these acts, and also what is key is know what are the penalties, so that you identify the keywords that deal with how these acts should be implemented. And then after you have identified those keywords, you can use them in the exam and it will help you to obtain marks. So now let us look into a typical exam question. Now, with that, I'll just give you 5 minutes. You try to answer, then I'll come back with the solutions. Welcome back. Now, the instruction, according to the typical exam question I gave you, says to you, read the scenario below and answer questions that follow. You have cyber enterprise, CE, cyber enterprise sells smartphones online. The management of cyber enterprise allows employees to form a trade union. Okay. Lesson second, but wait. With business studies, it's very, very important that you identify the keywords that would apply to each act, because the keywords would help you to identify, to determine as well which act is applicable in a scenario. Because in your section B, there's a lot of scenarios. And then the sentence continues and says, CE also ensures the implementation of affirmative action. Now, this is our keyword as well, because basically the questions will be asking based on whether a business is complying or a business is not complying. Therefore, it is important for you to know the keywords that are applied or applicable to each act. So when you look into 2.1, it says to you identify 2 acts applicable to the scenario above. Then it says motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. Then it says explain the impact of the act that was identified in question 2.1. Now, that is how you go about analyzing your question. But very, very important, The identification of these two acts helps you to score more marks with the impact. So if you will fail to identify correctly from the scenario, then you render yourself at the risk of losing the 6 marks in 2.2 because the impact should be based on the act that you shall have identified in question 2.1. Now, let us look into the solution, especially because we have encircled our key words. When we say the management of CE allows employees to form a trade union, then which act is applicable there? We are talking about what? Labor Relations, LRA. Why are we saying Labor Relations Act? Because Labor Relations Act is an act that talks about the relationship between the employer and the employee, especially if there is a dispute, especially if it talks about the representation, to say who can represent the employee and who can represent the employer. So in this regard, when the management of CE allows employees to form a trade union, they are allowing the employees to have a union or an association that would protect the employees if there are unfair working conditions. And then with the second part, which says now CE also ensures the implementation of affirmative action. Affirmative action is a policy under the Employment Equity Act, which says in the process of employing, consider those who were previously disadvantaged so that they can have equal opportunities or can have opportunities in wealth, because in the past they were previously disadvantaged. Hence we say previously disadvantaged, because these are individuals that in the past didn't have equal opportunities in the workplace or equal opportunities of being hired in a business. So that is what we are talking about, and that is the policy that would be used in the Employment Equity Act, which is called affirmative action. So whenever you see the word affirmative action, just know that the act that is applicable there is Employment Equity Act. Whenever you see anything that talks about trade union, anything that talks about collective bargaining, anything that talks about strike, and it is appearing in your question 2, you should know that question 2 legislation talks about what now? Question 2, any question on legislation and talking about trade unions, that should be labor relations. So let's check if I'm correct with that interpretation and analysis. So yes, I'm correct. 2 marks would be for labor relations, and they say motivate your answer by quoting. How do you quote? You take from the scenario the entire sentence as it is until the full stop. So let's check. The management of CE allows employees to form a trade union. That is correct. Then employment equity, yes, that's correct as well. I did mention that. How do you quote the CE from where the sentence starts? It starts here. You quote it in full, meaning you write it in full up to the end of the sentence. So let's check. CE also ensures the implementation of affirmative action, correct? Which act is that? Employment equity. Now we jump to 2.2, where we talk about explaining the impact of the act that was identified in question 2.1. Let's start with the first one, Labor Relations Act. Number 1, the advantage of Labor Relations Act, it ensures the participation of all parties in collective bargaining processes, which reduces conflict in the workplace. So all trade unions will be called and all employers association will be called. Then it protects the business and employer organizations in labor-related matters. So the business is protected because it means it is protected from any demand that might not make financial sense to the business. What are the disadvantages? The implementation of Labor Relations Act may be very costly and time-consuming, especially the dispute resolution process. So in a case of labor relations, the Labor Relations Act is an act that gives a protocol or it gives guideline on how how to deal with conflict or how to deal with dispute in the workplace. So it says here, it might be time consuming, especially to follow the resolutions or the steps in dispute when dealing with a dispute. A dispute is when an employee of a business is not happy maybe with the working conditions or salaries. So the process of solving that will mean time will be consumed not for business related activities but to solve the dispute between the employer and the employee. Then productivity may decrease significantly if employees engage in trade union related activities during their work hours, which is allowed according to the Labor Relations Act, but it is a disadvantage to the business because an employee is supposed to be performing their duties and responsibilities, but they leave their working environment and go and attend to the union activities or to the trade union activities, learning about how to protect other employees under the trade union. So that is going to be what now? Time consuming, and it will reduce the productivity of the business. Then as we proceed, we look into now the impact for what now? Employment Equity Act. Employment Equity Act is a process of saying now, in the process of hiring, the business should employ equally. They should consider all races and also consider those who were previously disadvantaged first in some circumstances. Hence we say, because in some businesses there would be one race or one language spoken, that meant there was no different in a form of the workforce. So hence we say there was no differences because there was only maybe one race or maybe there was only one language spoken. So it says employment equity encourages diversity in the business by employing people from various racial grounds or backgrounds. So basically here, the act says the advantage of implementing this act by a business, you would find African employees, Indian employees, you'd find colored employees together with white employees in one space, which would encourage diversity. Then another advantage is that it provides all employees with equal opportunities during the selection, appointments, and promotions in the workplace. However, what are the disadvantages? Businesses must submit employment equity plans and compliance certificates before the business could be conducted with the state. Then the training cost of the business will increase because employees need to be correctly trained regarding the implementation of Employment Equity Act. As we proceed, these are other aspects that you might be expected to identify from the scenario. The basic conditions of Employment Act, the provisions under the basic conditions of Employment Act would need you to know how to name them and also know how to identify them from the statement or scenario. Then we also have Consumer Protection Act, where we would say you should know how to identify the consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection Act. Then you should also know the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, because you have the pillars there, which is your management control, ownership, together with the skills development and enterprise and supply development, and the last one being social responsibility. This is what I consider to be Moses, because if you check, you have your management control, you have the O for ownership, you have the S for skills development, you have the E for enterprise and supply development, and you have the other S for social responsibility. So that is your Moses. If you think about the word Moses, you see that you have your answers regarding the pillars of your Black Economic Empowerment Act. Now, let's start by looking into this statement 2.2, and we're going to do it together, where we say identify the provisions of the basic conditions of Employment Act that Lerato Construction complied with in each statement below. So 2.2.1 says employees are required to give due notice before they can end their employment contract. That is one. And then another aspect says Lerato Construction does not allow or does not force employees to work for more than 3 hours extra per day. Very key is the issue of to work more than 3 hours extra, to work more than 3 hours extra. So the 3 hours extra serves as our keyword over there. Then 2.2.3, employees are advised to produce a medical certificate if they are absent from work for more than 2 consecutive days. So if an employee is absent for more than 2 consecutive days, they should supply a medical certificate. So these are the 3 provisions that are applicable, and the question is asking for provisions. So you need to know how to name and identify the provisions. So when you look into it, the first one, employees are required to give due notice before they can end the employment contract. We call this termination of employment contract. Then we say this is termination of employment. Then we also have the idea that Lerato Construction does not force its employees to work more than 3 hours extra. That provision is called overtime. Then, employees are advised to produce a medical certificate if they are absent from work for more than 2 consecutive. So it means the employee here was sick. Therefore, because they were sick, they had to stay away from work. But what is the answer? Because the question is looking for provisions. It is not looking for a certain type of leave. So therefore, the answer is leave as your answer. And you might be confused to say, but sir, why are you saying leave? Because the question is asking for a provision. And under this provision we call leave, we have types. We have types of leaves. But the examiner has asked for the provision. So you have what? Sick, family. In this regard, we say the answer is leave. We don't focus on the types of leaves because the provision that is being stated here is leave. Then, let's look into identifying the pillars of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, which is Act 53 of 2003, that OV Music Records has complied with in each statement below. OV Music Records uses Timber Sound Hire services for their music events. For their what? Music events. So what pillar is applicable there? So we say because now they are trying to improve the business of Timber Sound Hire service, which might be smaller than the OV Music Records. Therefore, we are saying this is enterprise and supplier development. Enterprise and supplier development. Then, OV Records takes all their artists to training to learn new innovations in music. Which pillar is that? The pillar that talks about improving or training or trying to push learning in the workplace is skills. Skills development. Then, OV Music Records has promoted 2 black females as heads of various departments, and that one we call the management control. So those are the pillars that are applicable. Then we proceed and look into the types of what now? Consumer rights. So under the what? The Consumer Protection Act. So I will say to you, let me give you 2 minutes to try to answer, then I will come back with the solutions. Welcome back. 2.4, we have statement-based question. You have 3 statements and you need to identify which consumer right is applicable. Now identify the consumer rights that is implemented by Kuruman Traders Ltd in each statement below. 2.4.1 says to you, the salesperson allows customers to shop around for the best price. 2.4.2 says customers are charged the same price for the same goods or service in different areas. And then 2.4.3 says consumers are given a written warranty for durable products. Now, your responsibility is to identify the consumer right that is applicable according to the Consumer Protection Act. You have 2.4.1 that says the salesperson allows customers to shop around for the best price. So the consumer right that is applicable here according to the Consumer Protection would be the right to choose. The right to choose. And then customers, when they are being charged the same price for the same goods or service in different areas, it means here we are seeing the right that talks about what? Equality in the consumer market. So this would be the right to equality in the consumer market. Then, consumers are given a written warranty for durable products. For durable products. So when you look into that, it says consumers are given what? A written warranty for durable products. What is a written warranty? A written warranty satisfies the idea that whatever product that we are buying as a consumer, the product is reliable and it's going to last for a very long time, which then talks to the consumer right that we say is fair value or good quality, because the business here is making the consumer feel safe to say whatever the product that we are selling to you is good value and is fair value and is good quality. So the first one would be the right to choose, followed by the right to equality in the consumer market, then the right to fair value or good quality by giving a written warranty. So the key word was the written warranty here for durable products. The key word here was the idea that consumers are charged the same price. It means there's equality. And then the key word here was shopping around, so that it allows the consumer to choose.